Your rear differential carries the power from the drive shaft and distributes it out to your axles, which then go to your wheels. Now, under acceleration, the differential will actually want to go a bunch of different directions. It'll want to go up, it'll want to go down, it'll want to go left, it'll want to go right, and it just kind of hangs there. And it's these suspension components that you see in red right now. So it's actually kind of cool, it's color coordinated. But everything that you see in red is responsible for keeping the differential set. The main thing that's going to set the center of your differential is going to be your ride height, which is primarily determined by your spring, which you see right here. If you change out your spring, you're going to change your ride height. When the car goes under hard acceleration, it's going to exhibit a characteristic known as squat, where the weight is going to transfer to the rear and it's going to compress the spring. When that happens, the differential's going to want to go two directions. It's going to want to go up and it's going to want to go out. The lower control arms seen here in red is what controls the rear end's tendency to go up, while the panhard bar here is what controls the rear end's tendency to go out. And by up, I mean physically up towards the top of the car, and by out, I mean towards the left or right of the car, towards the side. The panhard bar accomplishes this by having one point set up on the differential, which is seen here, and the other end is bolted to a fixed point on the car, which you can see right here. The lower control arm controls its travel by having one point set up on the chassis of the car, seen here, and the other point set up on the differential right there. The lower control arm will allow the differential to pivot on a point on the frame there, allowing the differential to travel upwards while maintaining a fixed distance outward towards the back of the car, meaning that it'll allow it to travel up, but the lower control arm will not allow it to travel back. The panhard bar is responsible for keeping the rear end centered during all phases of driving: acceleration, braking, and cruise. Even though this is a slightly exaggerated view because the rear differential doesn't have any weight on it, the lower control arm should have a slightly downward slope into geometry while the car is at rest. This allows the lower control arm to actually travel upward during hard acceleration. The majority of the time, the first modification that people will do to these cars is they will change the springs, which primarily changes the ride height. They will take out the factory spring setting and put in aftermarket springs. Depending on which brand, they can get anywhere from a 1/2 inch to a 2 inch aggressive drop. While it can look amazing on the car and it gives it that aggressive racer profile look that everybody goes for, the reality is that if you just drop the ride height on a car without any other modifications, you'll wreck the rear geometry. What I simply mean is that when this car was designed by GM with the stock components, it was designed with a certain ride height in mind, and everything else was designed around that. So when the car accelerates, the existing components are at the proper length and angle to properly accommodate for the power of the motor. So when you lower the car with the stock components in place, the existing stock suspension is going to have to accommodate for that. And usually it's going to accommodate by the lower control arms pushing the rear differential outward towards the back of the car, and the panhard bar is going to push the rear end to the side. Left side or right side, I'm not sure. But it is going to push the rear end off center. For a lot of people, they won't even notice this change visually, and they'll just keep driving the car happy and nothing will ever happen. The big problem you run into is if you start chasing power without making the appropriate modifications. If the rear end isn't centered, the power that the car is putting out isn't being applied directly true to your forward motion of travel, and you could have issues. In fact, I'm a little convinced that's why a lot of these cars got wrecked back when they were popular, because people weren't making the modifications to the suspension after they dropped them and chased after the big power. It's just how these cars were. They were so new at the time, and until these cars came out, nobody really had the opportunity to have a car with the performance in a chassis like this. Nowadays we take it for granted, but back then it was new stuff, and people just didn't know what they were dealing with. So there was a little bit of a knowledge gap.